Hey guys, so should we clap for the new president of South Korea, Lee Jae-myung, or should we lock our doors for what happens when a villain straight out of a K-drama becomes the president of your country? Because for better or worse, we have definitely got ourselves a K-drama president now. So this week, Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung won the presidency. Remember, this was a snap election, which basically means like an unplanned oopsie election after we impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol for his botched martial law attempt in December. So 6 months later, Korea already has a brand new president. You might be like, wow, that's so great. Korea, democracy. Look at how powerful the voice of the people is. They're going out and protesting and holding candlelight vigils. They're protecting their democracy from a dictatorship. Yes, that's definitely a good thing that happened in terms of the self-defense mechanism of the South Korean society. But to impeach two presidents within a decade is quite the undemocracy type situation that people had to put up with in order to get to that breaking point. It's like saying that, somebody who spends all their time in a hospital saying like, oh my gosh, your health must be so strong. You're always in the hospital. No, right? So for better or worse, but does Lee Jae-myung actually deserve to be president in a nutshell? And should you be worried outside of South Korea? And I would say for being worried? No. If you're in Korea, I would be more worried. Does he deserve to be president? Even though you know how I feel about him and still feel about him, he does seem to be the best person who could have filled those shoes, for better or worse, but fill those big shoes and come in with a government ready to go and have the political power base. He was very in an opportune way. And even though this was a referendum against President Yoon, with this vote, it was about 49% for Mr. Lee Jae-myung and about 41.3% for his opponent from the conservative side. But the conservative ticket sort of split. There were two candidates and one guy didn't merge his party. And if you added both of those votes up, it would have been tiny bit more than Lee Jae-myung's votes. And remember, in the last presidential election against Yoon Suk-yeol in 2022, Lee Jae-myung also ran and he lost by a tiny margin. So he's already been popular with half of the country. Twice he has been voted, almost like in a 50-50 split with half of the country. So does he deserve to be there in that sense? I would say yes. But what got him elected recently that worked out in his favor, even though this was like a referendum against Yoon Suk-yeol, he was the one, I'm saying this guy is a performer like nobody else. He live streamed his journey to the National Assembly on martial law night to try to save democracy, and he live streamed his car ride, and then he even live streamed him hopping over the fence to make sure that he was able to get into the building to cast his vote to make sure that they could cancel the martial law declaration. Oh yes, at 61 years old, he is scaling the fence for democracy. So no matter how old you are, make sure you keep doing your Pilates or whatever he's doing, because you never know if you can become president by scaling a fence. On the surface, it looks like the Korean dream, rags to riches story. He grew up in poverty. He had to work in a factory starting, he says, at the age of 12. Like he was one of these child laborers before, I guess, there was the child labor laws. And while he was also working and damaging his body, I think his arm or something from like a factory machine, he studied to get into law school and passed the bar exam, became a human rights lawyer, and then the mayor of the Silicon Valley of Korea, basically Seongnam, a city south of Seoul, then the governor of that province, and then a presidential candidate, then an assemblyman, and now the president of South Korea. But he is still involved in 5 trials on 12 charges, all of which are underway, and he was also being accused of playing a role in the deaths of at least 5 people connected to his trials and ongoing corruption. We are going to get into one of the particular mysterious deaths involving the lawyer at the Pink Motel. Oh, you thought the Pink Motel was just from Squid Game? No, there was a Pink Motel before season 2 of the Squid Game, okay? So, but let's go over more of the milder version, even though there's nothing mild about this man. So it's just going to be hot, extra hot, and deadly hot, okay? So, hot. Well, remember, he was... In terms of his character, we're looking at his character right now, living high on the hog of the government's money, using the government's car for his wife, spending like $200, $300 a day on, expensive fruit and red meat. And you're thinking like, how is that possible? Well, anybody in Korea can tell you, if you buy the premium, it is definitely possible. $20 apples. Yeah, just one apple, $20. If you've never tasted it, you're going to be like, what? Why? But if you've tasted it, then ain't no other Cheeto going to touch your lips. You're going to be just wanting like the apples and the watermelons and everything. And then the delicious Hanu meat, which is like Kobe beef of Korea. Anyhow, so... There was like a lot of allegations that, a lot of lying and, just misappropriating money and abusing staff. The reason why we found out about, them using the company card and up to the limit where you don't really have to do detailed reporting in order to, buy their expensive groceries like that, because the staff that was in charge of organizing the fruit drawer, making sure that there was no mold, like the strawberries were placed perfectly in all the containers, like, now those TikTok videos you see of people who are just like way organizing the refrigerator, something like that, except those TikTokers are doing it for themselves. In this situation, the assistants that work for the government office, not personal assistants, government employees had to do all of this stuff. And as evidence, that they completed their task, had to take a picture and Kakao Talk it to the wife. And so that's why we have this evidence, because then, some of these people, they got pissed. Because why? One dude had to go. I thought first it was a female government employee. No, it was a male government employee. Not only did he have to organize the fruit drawer, take a picture of it, he had to organize the panty drawer. Panties, yes, underwear. Make sure it was perfectly organized, the drawer of his wife. Okay? What kind of sicko is that? And so, yes, you could be like, okay, abusive staff, yeah, horrible, but very common in this world. Well, not only that, we have the audio recordings, and I'm going really fast through this because there is just so much susness. Like all of them were a separate video, yes, already on my channel. So abuse of the brother and wife. There are situations where they argued over family dinner at Lee Jae-myung's house, and then the brother and the wife left, drove back home. By the time they showed up at home, the police were waiting for them to take them into jail because they were pissed off. Lee Jae-myung was pissed off at his brother over some argument that they had at the dinner table when he was like the mayor or the governor and had the power to call the police and send them over to do whatever he wanted. You might be thinking, okay, well, that might just be a misunderstanding. There is audio recordings that the brother's wife saved and released to the public, went on, her own media campaign to say like, this guy is a psycho. Take a listen to these recordings of how he calls up our house and first asks for my husband, his brother, his older brother, so that he can Lee Jae-myung can release his stress by verbally assaulting and abusing and belittling the brother. When the wife of the brother was trying to just be a firewall against that, he would go after her. And the worst line that I ever heard when Lee Jae-myung was verbally abusing his older brother was, "Do you want me to stab your mama in the biscuit?" He didn't use the word biscuit, but if you know what a biscuit is, or basically like he said it in the way in Korean, the direct translation, the hole that you came out of. And he's like, "You want me to do that?" And then, okay, not only is that horrible, it is psycho because they're brothers. That means it's his mama and it's Lee Jae-myung's mama. So he's like threatening to do that to somebody else's mom, forgetting that it's his mama too. You could be like, well, everybody has the shadow side, a dark side. Maybe this is just not a good time for him. Okay, yes, there is the shadow side, but there is a black hole that is on a completely different level of crazy. And I almost forgot, like while I was doing a recap of all of this, I forgot about the actress. How could I forget about the actress? So this actress who had an affair with Lee Jae-myung while he was still married, and he's still married now, but nobody made a big deal out of that part. He denied it publicly, and she got pissed off because apparently, I guess that didn't end well. And she's also a person scorned, and there was something about what she saw on the inside of Lee Jae-myung that she really felt like it was her mission in life to inform the public of this is the type of person you are voting for if you want to, if you're going to vote him in for president. And she just went so far as to basically say, like, "I'm not a liar. I even know what kind of marks are on his," the only metaphor I could come up with right now is broomstick. Just like, I know what his broomstick looks like, and it, if I'm lying, then, and so he actually, to his credit, that's what I'm saying, this guy is a performer. Even when he's questioned by this in like a debate format on TV by the reporter, he was like, "Hey, you want me to drop my pants and show you?" He did get in trouble for that, but in some ways that kind of, made him like kind of funny to a lot of people, and people were seeing him as very open and transparent because most other people wouldn't be that kind of frank like that. And so he got this reputation of being like so frank because he had sort of a potty mouth. He even went so far as to go to like some dermatologist, plastic surgeon at some university hospital that was in his district, where he got his broomstick inspected and certified that it did not have the markings that the actress was claiming. That's how far it went. All right, you might be like, okay, well, whatever. Those are just like, weird peccadillos that, most politicians, have these days. What can you say? Well, let's go extra hot because there's always got to be a corruption. And you might even think corruption, that's a mild sauce, not even in the extra hot category, but it is extra hot when it gets into this kind of multi-billion-dollar corruption. In a nutshell, while he was the mayor, emperor, governor of a particular province, there's, undeveloped land, and you're always trying to create new cities out of it because as the politician and as the business people, real estate people, everybody makes money, and so he was able to be overseeing a project called Daejang-dong, which is the name of the new neighborhood. And when he's, going out, like, all of these trials and defenses, he's saying, like, I didn't directly oversee anything. It was just happening while my government was in power, but I have no hands on it. I received no money on it in terms of like bribes, even though other people were accused and proven of having bribes. So officially, just to officialize it, he hasn't been 100%, I believe, convicted of the worst part of these corruption allegations. But what this does in terms of these big development projects is create a political slush fund. So when you need to, especially as we're going to get into this, a specific case is to hire the best lawyers that can overturn rulings because of the connection of the lawyers to the courts, because they were former judges or former prosecutors. And so that comes with a hefty price tag. How you going to pay for it? You need a slush fund. And that's not to mention, he's shown holding hands with leaders of the Korean mafia and stuff like that. So other videos go into all of the more specifics of the land scandal. Just think it's sort of like the whitewater of, the Clintons were accused of something where like you have access to control over a land deal and then structure it in a way where you get the money. And the shady part that they did, really it just glared at people was that usually like if your city is overseeing this new development and it's the government, then the profits go to the government, and that's great for the citizens. But the way that he structured it was that instead of the money going into the city government or the provincial government, he created like an investment fund or investment organization that then got the money. All right, but you're thinking like, okay, well, that's just money, even though it's a lot of money. I mean, we're talking about Dior bags and Chanel bags bringing down the former first lady. This is on a level where you could probably buy a subsidiary or the whole thing of Dior. But you might be thinking, that's just still just kind of money corruption. All right, let's go to Dead Hot, because there was apparently there's 5 suspicious deaths connected to these scandals, but we're going to go over 3 in particular and then just 1 out of the 3. So like I said about that, those organizations that were set up, like Development Corporation and then an investment fund that worked together. Well, 2 people who were essentially the right-hand people and, the plants placed by whoever the big guy is. So the big guy, everybody's thinking was Lee Jae-myung, is still Lee Jae-myung, but Lee Jae-myung still, in a way, can say I'm not the big guy. There's no percentage coming to me. I'm not the... But who does all of this benefit the most and have the potential to put somebody into the president's office? Which didn't happen by a narrow margin in 2022, but did happen in 2025. Why did it benefit Lee Jae-myung the most? Well, if all of this had happened, where the whistleblowers and then also the people who were nabbed involved with this corruption process sang more like birds, then essentially Lee Jae-myung would not have been able to run for president in March of 2022. That was the election, March 2022. So basically in the 6 to 7 months before then, this was a real deadly time in Korea if you were linked to this type of situation. So in just the scope of a month, 3 people died in connection to this. December 10th, it was the Seongnam Urban Development Corporation director, Yoo Han-gi. He was found dead in a flower bed near his apartment complex. Then, 11 days later, December 21st, Kim Moon-gi, the head of the Development Division 1 of Seongnam Urban Development Corporation, he was investigated several times by the prosecution. He was found dead in his office. And then a whistleblower who we're going to get into, the attorney Lee Byung-chul, died January 12th, 2022 in the Pink Motel. So why was this critically important? All of these trials that Lee Jae-myung was involved in and is still involved in, the pivotal part is whether it violates the Public Election Act. And if you violate that, then you can't run for public office. And so that would just like take him out of the game. And at that point, the entire party is behind Lee Jae-myung. And if basically like a month, 2 months, 3 months before the election, your guy is taken out, what is the party going to do? Can you even imagine such a situation? I guess you can. And what lengths people are willing to go to, even if it involves perhaps offing people to make sure your guy wins. I don't know if you can even imagine that. Or maybe you can. And so there was a situation where Lee Jae-myung was found guilty in the lower courts that would have prevented him from running for elected office, but the Supreme Court overturned the verdict in July 2020, and it turns out that the former Supreme Court justice who was involved with the overturning had retired and then started to get monthly consulting fees that were about $20,000, $17,000 to $20,000 a month in consulting fees from that financial venture fund that was set up to handle that land redevelopment project that was under Lee Jae-myung's time as the leader of that region. Remember that? So that's how like a political slush fundy type of thing could work. So these are a lot of trials, and it's pivotal, right? Because it can knock out the major candidate of a major party. And so there are a lot of lawyers tied to such type of situations. So now if you're thinking about the whole New Jeans Mama situation and like, you know, how all these lawyers are paid, are they really paying out of pocket? Of course, we never really can know unless we have situations like this where there's like whistleblowers. So this was a case of drama happening out of essentially, it looks like a white lie from Lee Jae-myung about how much he paid his lawyers, because he's being attacked. And so Lee Jae-myung is just saying like, well, I'm being attacked by the conservatives unjustly. You know, they're accusing me of malfeasance when it comes to my lawyer fees, but like my 25 lawyers, a lot of them did it pro bono, and it only cost $250,000, maybe with the exchange rate $200,000, and everyone's just saying, no, that just wouldn't really be feasible, because they compared it to some other CEO who had fewer lawyers and had a similar amount of casework, and it was like $4 million at least for his situation. And then it turns out that we have a whistleblower that showed that there was evidence that he claimed, although the Democratic Party and Lee Jae-myung still to this day says that it's all fake, it was like not real. But he has these recordings, and this is the lawyer in the pink motel who was whistleblowing 6 months before the election. That, no, it was a lot more than that. It was several $1 million, and it involved an underwear manufacturer getting involved in paying the lawyers through stocks of that company. And it was like a chummy underwear company. Well, it's actually the biggest underwear manufacturer in Korea. They make try. So, you know, if you try, well, they done tried to, being accused, at least, of being involved. And the people who are in the legal team and on the board of like this underwear manufacturer is just kind of like a revolving door. So there are close ties, and that's why people were looking at them. But in essence, this whistleblower is essentially saying that, well, his legal fees are being covered by other people. And this is the damaging part. So it's gonna be a quid pro quo situation. They pay his legal fees, make sure he can still run. He gets into the office of the presidency. These people will want a payback, and they want their reward for paying his legal fees. And so that was something that could have potentially been proven and given out to the public. The recordings were released eventually to the public, but it had a very convoluted route because this guy who was the Pink Motel lawyer who had these recordings was very scared for his life. He was hiding out in that Pink Motel for at least 3 months, and he was talking to reporters about and trying to suss out whether he's going to do it and whether he can trust these reporters. What did these recordings say, and who was it with, and why was he even in there? So he's a lawyer himself, but he's like a divorce lawyer, and he's also like an activist who wanted to reduce the stigma of single parent households in Korea, and people describe him as somebody who is just cannot stand injustice, and he was closely tied with the Democratic Party. So it's not as if he was an enemy of Lee Jae-myung at first, but then in interviews with reporter saying like he also, just like that actress and other people who really get to see him for who he is, they're just like really creeped out and actually want to work against him. And so this lawyer, his name was Lee Byung-chul, he was 56 years old. He was business partners with this businessman named Che, who they keep talking about. And then they were introduced to Lee Tae-hyung, who is a prosecutor turned lawyer who was working on Lee Jae-myung's cases. And in this recording, they talked about the compensation structure and how it was much more than just $200,000 and it involved like some complicated stock maneuvers and things like that. It's still not very clear about like why Lee Byung-chul was sitting in that place to begin with. And it seems like a lot of reporters are sort of glossing over that fact. But in essence, Mr. Che knew this prosecutor turned lawyer, and it looked like Mr. Lee Byung-chul was sort of like on the informal team of helping out Lee Jae-myung at first, and then he turned. So let's look at this Pink Motel lawyer timeline. August 2021 is when he first starts talking to a reporter back and forth on whether he can trust him with this audio evidence, and this becomes an exclusive for this reporter. And this reporter is like, I'm all in, we'll take responsibility for it. These discussions go into September, but this is when it seems as if the Democratic Party got wind of this and started to attack this lawyer, trying to shut him up with, being prosecuted, investigated. But the media did report on there is the existence of this recording, and then some of them started to leak out, and not all of them, about 2 out of 4, I believe. And then in November, the Democratic Party amped up its attack and submitted a petition to the prosecution to arrest this lawyer who was at this point like hiding out in the Pink Motel. Maybe he didn't want to get his summons or something. And they're basically accusing this guy of saying like, this is all false information about this alleged legal fee situation. And so if they arrested him, then it looks like the story would just go away because he would have no credibility over the story because, he's arrested, they found evidence that maybe he's making it up. Now, this reporter is still in contact with Mr. Lee, or the Pink Motel lawyer, and asking for the additional recordings and saying like, even if you don't give it to me, just let me know so that, I could report on it, because he's invested a lot of his time. He didn't get like the total scoop of it. And so he's been talking to this reporter. So December 8th is the last time this reporter in particular met up with the Pink Motel lawyer, and they talked about like, whether they had a falling out, that this lawyer had a falling out with Lee Jae-myung or the Democratic Party. And the lawyer said, no, it's not a falling out. I just didn't like that recording of him swearing at his sister-in-law. And I also don't like that how Lee Jae-myung is always suing and indicting people who oppose him. So that's one of the scary parts. You're thinking about martial law as just kind of like on a blanket universal level of abuse of power. The other thing to be scared of that, some particular group of people really do frequently is weaponizing the law and turning it into lawfare and indicting and suing and using the weapons of the law as intimidation and outright weapons to obliterate people's lives if you oppose them. And this lawyer was saying like, yeah, I know a lot of people within our own party that he's doing this to. And then he also said that his own daughter was threatened, that gangsters even sent him messages and a picture of his daughter saying that you gotta be careful. So he was just pissed off about this whole situation. Then December 10th, that first dude connected, who's supposed to be on the side of, the slush fundiness. He was the one that was found in his flower bed, right? Gone. And this Pink Motel lawyer loved, posting on Facebook. And, he said after, responding to that death that he's never going to never going to off himself ever at least until he sees his children get married. Then when another offing happened on December 21st, he also posted on Facebook, and Pink Motel lawyer guy was saying like, dude, the police really need to conduct a proper autopsy on this guy, even down to the minute injection marks on his body. Of course, police are saying like natural, and then even in this Pink Motel lawyers guy situation, natural. So on January 12th, the Pink Motel lawyer guy goes down, and the police say that there's no signs of external intrusion found at the motel, no external injuries on the body that could lead to the cause of death. Although we've already seen from the SJM situation, there were tons of markings of external trauma that could lead to somebody's death, but they just called it scratches. So, but that is what the officials said, that there was no foul play. It was natural, that he died of heart issues like aortic dissection and rupture from having clogged arteries. They're saying that, he wasn't in good health. And yes, here is this example of him trying to climb the stairs of the motel that we caught in CCTV. And wow, look, he's wheezing up the stairs. So be careful, guys. If you have trouble with stairs, that might turn into evidence of why, maybe you just keeled over, and departed this dimension from natural causes. So in a nutshell, this is just a situation of strange coincidence officially, and that there's no connection to the current president of South Korea, and that this is all just a weird misunderstanding, that most likely all of this stuff is just going to be swept under the rug until it becomes the fodder for the blowback against him, because we all know how the real K-drama works now, right? In terms of the presidential office, it looks like Lee Jae-myung is not gonna want to still operate out of the defense ministry, when President Yoon, probably because of his shaman saying like, ooh, they're bad juju over there in the presidential office, we gotta move down to Yongsan and, next to like a shopping mall. It looks like Lee Jae-myung wants to return back to the presidential office. So we might be looking at the return of Chung Hwa-dae. So what do you guys think? Are you excited about this new chapter in South Korea's history? Or are you worried like I am? All right, guys, put your comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.